was not on any architectural plan ever filed with the county. It had been constructed during a renovation in 2017, built into the foundation of the master bedroom of a beachfront property on the Gulf Coast of Florida, behind a section of wall that presented as a standard closet with built-in shelving. The shelving unit was real. It held clothes, shoes, and personal items exactly as any closet would. But the back wall of that closet was a reinforced steel panel, 12 gauge, anchored to a concrete enclosure that extended 6 feet into the house's foundation. The panel was controlled by a biometric lock mounted inside the closet frame, disguised as a standard electrical outlet. Inside the vault, which measured 8 feet by 10 feet and was climate controlled to preserve paper documents, FBI agents found 17 encrypted hard drives, 41 manila envelopes containing financial documentation organized by year from 2015 through 2024, $312,000 in mixed currency in banded stacks, and a single composition notebook written in the hand of the vault's owner, Federal Judge Arthur Pemberton of the Southern District of Florida, that agents on scene described as a 9-year operational ledger connecting Pemberton's decisions on the federal bench to payments received from a financial coordinator working for the Gulf operations of the Sinaloa Cartel. The total value of assets documented in those envelopes and hard drives, according to the federal indictment unsealed 4 days after the raid, was $6.1 billion. Judge Pemberton was arrested at the property at 4:17 in the morning on March 23rd in 2026. He had been a sitting federal judge for 22 years. He had been appointed by 2 different presidents. He had presided over 41 federal drug trafficking cases involving Sinaloa-connected defendants. He had sentenced 11 cartel members to federal prison. He had delivered lectures at 3 law schools on judicial ethics and the rule of law. And according to the indictment, he had been on the Sinaloa Cartel's payroll for 9 of those 22 years. To understand the specific nature of the corruption the FBI uncovered, you need to understand what it means for a federal judge to be compromised by a criminal organization. A sitting Article III federal judge in the United States has lifetime tenure. They cannot be fired. They can only be removed by impeachment in Congress. Within their district, their authority over the cases assigned to them is essentially absolute. They decide what evidence comes in and what evidence gets suppressed. They decide what instructions the jury receives. They decide, in cases that never reach a jury, whether charges survive at all. A cartel that can influence a single federal judge in a major port district does not merely buy protection for individual defendants. It buys the ability to shape the legal environment in which its entire regional operation functions. Charges get dismissed on procedural grounds that would not survive scrutiny elsewhere. Evidence gets suppressed under rulings that misapply the law in ways that only become visible years later when a different judge reviews the same legal question and reaches the opposite conclusion. Defendants who should spend decades in prison walk out of courthouses on time-served sentences and return to cartel operations within weeks. According to the FBI's investigation, that is precisely what happened in the Southern District of Florida for 9 years under Judge Pemberton. The investigation that led to the March 23rd raid did not begin with Pemberton. It began as several of the most significant corruption investigations of the past 2 years have begun, with a financial anomaly flagged by a bank compliance system. In late 2023, a wealth management firm in the Cayman Islands filed a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, identifying a series of structured deposits into an account registered to a Delaware shell company called Meridian Coastal Holdings. The deposits were structured to remain below reporting thresholds, a pattern that compliance software increasingly flags regardless of individual transaction size. When the cumulative volume and timing suggest deliberate structuring, over 26 months, Meridian Coastal Holdings had received deposits totaling approximately $47 million from sources that FinCEN's forensic analysts traced back through a chain of intermediary accounts to Gulfside Sinaloa, financial operations based in Tamaulipas. The Delaware Shell Company, after a warrant to the registered agent, turned out to own 3 properties. One was a commercial parking structure in Hialeah, one was a warehouse in Doral, and one was the beachfront property in Collier County, where Judge Pemberton spent his weekends and vacations, and where FBI agents found the vault beneath the master bedroom closet. The discovery that a federal judge owned property through a shell company funded by cartel money transformed the investigation immediately. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit took over from the Financial Crimes Task Force. A team of 12 investigators spent 7 months building the case before seeking the search warrant. That time was spent reconstructing the full financial relationship, mapping the 41 drug trafficking cases Pemberton had presided over to identify anomalous outcomes, reviewing every suppression ruling and dismissal order he had issued over the relevant period, and working with current and former assistant United States attorneys in the Southern District to identify specific cases where Pemberton's rulings had produced outcomes that the prosecutors involved had found inexplicable at the time. What they found across 9 years of case history was a pattern that no single ruling made visible, but that became unmistakable when viewed in aggregate. 23 of the 41 drug trafficking cases involving Sinaloa-connected defendants assigned to Pemberton's docket had resulted in evidence suppression rulings, dismissals, or sentencing reductions that diverged significantly from rulings in comparable cases before other judges in the same district. In 3 cases, defendants who had pleaded guilty to charges carrying mandatory minimums of 10 years or more had received sentences of 2 to 4 years based on cooperation agreements that prosecutors on those cases told investigators they had not initiated and did not understand the basis for. 2 of those defendants were identified in the composition notebook, recovered from the vault by name, with corresponding payment entries dated within 6 weeks of their sentencing hearings. The notebook is the center of the prosecution's case, and the piece of evidence that Pemberton's defense team will spend the most energy challenging. A handwritten ledger is powerful evidence of intent because it demonstrates not just that transactions occurred, but that the person writing understood what the transactions represented and chose to document them. Prosecutors believe Pemberton kept the ledger for the same reason Senator Whitmore kept handwritten records in a home safe as an insurance policy, a record that could be used to implicate others if the relationship with the cartel ever turned adversarial. The notebook contains entries for 44 separate payments over 9 years, ranging from $40,000 to $1.2 million, with notations that investigators have partially decoded as references to specific case numbers, specific defendants, and specific rulings. The cartel's financial coordinator named in the indictment as Pemberton's primary contact is a Mexican national currently outside U.S. jurisdiction. His identity is known to investigators. An extradition request is pending through Interpol. Pemberton was not alone in his exposure when the FBI moved. The indictment names 2 co-defendants. The first is his judicial clerk, a 29-year-old Harvard Law graduate named Jonathan Serrano, who had worked in Pemberton's chambers for 3 years and who, according to the indictment, served as the operational intermediary between the judge and the cartel's financial coordinator, receiving instructions for specific rulings via an encrypted messaging application, conveying those instructions to the judge, and confirming outcomes back to the coordinator after hearings concluded. The second co-defendant is the owner of the Meridian Coastal Holdings shell company, a South Florida real estate attorney named Patricia Voss, who structured the property acquisition and managed the financial flows between the cartel's Cayman accounts and the shell company's operating account for 6 years. Serrano has not entered a cooperation agreement. Voss has, and according to sources familiar with the case, her cooperation has been substantive. She has provided documentation of communications with the cartel coordinator, records of every property transaction involving Pemberton-connected entities over 6 years, and names of at least 2 additional individuals who received payments from the same financial network. The 41 drug trafficking cases that passed through Pemberton's courtroom are now subject to a comprehensive review by the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. That review will take months. For the defendants who are currently serving sentences in those cases, the review creates the possibility of appeals based on judicial bias and corruption appeals that could result in retrials or resentencing hearings. For the defendants who walked free under Pemberton's more favorable rulings, some of whom are identified in the indictment as having returned to cartel operations after their release, the review creates a different kind of exposure. Federal prosecutors are examining whether charges can be refiled in cases where statutes of limitations have not expired, and whether cooperation agreements obtained under Pemberton's oversight can be challenged as products of a corrupt process. The broader implications extend beyond the individual cases. The Southern District of Florida is one of the most significant federal jurisdictions in the country for drug trafficking prosecutions. It covers Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and the surrounding area, a region that serves as a primary entry point for narcotics moving from South America and Mexico into the eastern United States. A compromised judge in that district, operating over 9 years, represents a systemic failure of the oversight mechanisms that are supposed to ensure judicial integrity. The FBI's investigation has produced 1 arrest and 2 co-conspirators. But the 9 years of case history that the review is now examining represent a body of potentially corrupted legal proceedings involving hundreds of defendants, dozens of prosecutors, and outcomes that shape the cartel's operational environment in one of the country's most important trafficking corridors. The vault beneath the beach house held $6.1 billion in documented proceeds. The actual cost of what those 9 years of corrupted justice enabled in terms of drug volume moved, overdose deaths downstream, and cartel revenue generated is a number that no indictment will ever fully calculate. The investigation continues. This is Federal Watch Network.